Welcome to GoalPost. Now your host, Janelle Sam.
How many of you believe that if you've been in a job or a particular career for a long time, that it is difficult, almost impossible, to redefine that path or that journey? How many of you would be interested in hearing from the perspectives of someone who is in the middle of redefining what success is after being in a defined path for almost 3 decades? Welcome to GoalPost. If this is what you want to hear today, you're in the right place, and I thank you for listening. Over the next couple of hours, I'm going to have a conversation with a guest who is, I just think, incredible. We're going to talk about what success looked like or was defined as, 3 decades ago. We're going to talk about how do you define success in a way that you could measure it so that you know undeniably that you have achieved it or that you can achieve it. This is a conversation that will help you redefine for yourself what that means and forge a more purposeful and intentional path. Well, today I am joined by one of my favorite professors while I was pursuing an MBA at Cornell University. I am joined by Professor Marc Busch, and he is the Carl F. Landegger Professor of International Business Diplomacy at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He's an expert on international trade policy and law. He writes a bi-weekly piece in The Hill on Trade, and he previously served for 2 terms as a cleared advisor on technical trade barriers to the U.S. Department of Commerce and the United States Trade Representative. Additionally, Marc has addressed a wide range of governments and international institutions, including the Advisory Center on World WTO Law, the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, and the United Nations. He has testified before the US Congress on Airbus Boeing litigation, the Canadian Senate on softwood lumber litigation, and a NAFTA 2022 panel on best practices in dispute settlements. He previously taught at Queen's University and Harvard, and in 2010, Forbes magazine named his course, Business, Government, and the Global Economy, one of the top 10 most innovative MBA courses in the United States. And that was a class I took, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. And, it forged this relationship. I cannot speak highly enough of you, Marc. Marc, thank you for joining me today. So welcome.
Thank you for having me, Janelle. I'm well, thanks. How are you? And congratulations on GoalPost.
Thank you. I know. So for the listeners, for everyone who's listening, this show, I was having a conversation with Marc, and in the middle of a sentence, I think I said something about, what's your GoalPost? And he was like, that's it. That's the name of your show. And so that is how it came about. And so I am very, very happy to have him here. So Marc, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
Right. I just, introduced you, and for anyone listening, they're like, oh my God, like, how does one even start? Like, what did you wake up at 5 and decide, well, I want to be a professor of international trade and business? Like, how did you even end up in that career path?
Really couldn't have been further from my thinking. My ambition was to go to law school when I was an undergrad. And in my senior year, I had a chance to do some research, and I really liked that. And it led me to think that perhaps there was a career out there for me where I could do more teaching. And after a variety of quirks and circumstances, I ended up pursuing a PhD. And it was the weirdest thing. I fell in love with the idea of being a professor, a teacher in particular. And 28 years later, here I am. But if I was to say that I had mapped this one out, I'd be lying to you, Janelle. And I wouldn't lie to you, Janelle. It's really not something that at a young age I had anticipated following through on. But I'm really glad that I did. And for all that's said and done, it has brought out a certain character in me that obviously gets me to relate on a very strong wavelength with you.
Well, let's talk about that, because you said you initially set out to go to law school. You wanted to be an attorney. What did you define success as, when you were in your 20s? Because what happened along the way is something changed. So what did you initially think success was when you were, let's say, you were 20? What in your mind was that at the time?
When I was 20, I didn't even know what jobs existed out in the world. My sense was that my father as a professor was one route. My mother as a lawyer was another route. And then as far as I could tell, all of my commerce type colleagues in college were going off to work at Procter and Gamble. So I imagine three scenarios in the world that were rather viable. They seem to pay at different levels, and I'm sure, like most 20-year-olds, I certainly anticipated the need to be able to sustain myself and to make a couple of dollars to that end. And I really think by the time I was a senior that my sense of success was less classical, I want to make a lot of bucks, and more, I want to be relevant. And being relevant has a number of ways of kind of thinking through the goalposts.
Yeah.
But when I began to ply my trade, I realized that I do like to give presentations. I do like to teach. And it was an epiphany that led me to realize that odds are I was not going to be rich, but I could still be relevant.
Well, that is, it's interesting that you articulated in that way, being relevant. And being relevant means different things for different people. So for some listeners who are listening, being relevant might mean, being important to a family unit. Do you think that being relevant is tied to your purpose, which is you wanted to teach, you wanted to connect, you wanted to improve the lives of others? And so I'm really curious. You decided along the path of teaching, but if you were an attorney, you would still be relevant. And I use that term in parentheses in terms of adding value to others. Was there a moment where there was something that clicked for you that you felt that you could be more relevant on the teaching research track versus being an attorney in whatever capacity or practice you might have chosen?
I don't doubt that there was a role for me had I been intent on pursuing the career in law to be relevant. And obviously lawyers do some wonderful things, and I certainly had seen that growing up. I guess for me, it came down to matching my skill set to that passion for having an audience. And being relevant was a way for me to connect with people and to hash out ideas that I thought were compelling and potentially pushed me as well as my audience to be better than we were. And that was very exciting. And so the equilibrium struck me as pretty obvious early on. And I have to say that it's still what keeps me motivated to this day. It would be difficult to sustain a 28-year career as a professor if there wasn't that love for ideas and that love for sharing those ideas with which I'm in love.
Well, I want to find out, we'll talk a little bit more about, what it was that kept you sustained through 28 years of doing, quote unquote, I'm putting it in air quotes. I love using this, the same thing. right? And, if that felt like you were doing, it was just on repeat. If it was ever like groundhog day. And I really want to get into that, because did you stay in it because you were good at it and it was safe and predictable? Did you stay in it because you were constantly reinventing the way you were adding value and being relevant in the course of you disposing of education to the students over the years, right? And what were some of those challenges? I know there's a lot of questions in here that I'm kind of throwing at you, but one of the things that so many people struggle with is feeling as though life has become predictable, and what was once started off as being passionate, it's no longer there because it's not been redefined. Like, how have you been able to do that over the course of almost 3 decades?
Part of it is internal and part of it is external. There's definitely been a lot of revamping, like you say, reinventing myself, reinventing the subject matter that I teach. If I was to tell you about my course load in 1994 when I started out at Harvard at the age of 27, you would giggle, because it's about as remote from what I do now as could possibly be true. And part of what happened is that I learned. I've been learning ever since I went into college, and it really hasn't stopped. And if anything, that's one of the benefits of pursuing this kind of career in academia. But I have to say that it's also external. And I can tell you stories about times when I was just a young assistant professor at Harvard, and I'd have diplomats call me up and ask, "Can I come to your class?" And I'd say, "Sure." And they'd come and they'd look at me and they'd leave.
No, tell me about that. Tell me. What do you mean they'd leave? Was it that they were bored?
I didn't look like a professor. I didn't look like an old white guy who had a beard and was kind of your stereotypical looking academic. And I guess they decided that by virtue of my youth, that there was nothing I had to offer them. And it stung. It certainly was not something I enjoyed, but it was something that I kind of got used to. And over time, you gain credibility because my hair went white, and I began to learn a lot of things that allowed me to engage different types of audiences. And that certainly was important for building my self-confidence, but also building my repertoire of things that I could creatively construe in real time for the sake of whoever was in front of me. And that is something that has never ceased to motivate me. It's the next audience. It's the next level. And that's why the title of your radio show is so ideal. The goalposts do move. And that's a function of not only my own ambitions, but the opportunities that are presented to me externally.
Wow. Okay. So I think there's a few things that you've just mentioned there that I'd like, for us to unpack a little bit more. But right now, we're just going to take a very brief break. And after the break, we're going to continue this conversation. Okay, we're back. And just before the break, Marc was telling, the story of what his career looked like and how he was perceived early on, right? Almost, it was 28 years ago. So Marc, you said that you had, you're teaching at Harvard, right? You're educated, you are in a position of learned authority, but because your physical appearance, so describe what you looked like. And, tell me a little bit more about what challenges you faced as that was happening.
One of my favorite stories is that when I started at Harvard, I was with a friend down at the MIT Coop, and I went to register. And the Harvard MIT Coop had a little bit of paperwork that you had to fill out.
Wait, I'm sorry. What is the MIT Coop?
It's the bookstore.
Oh, okay. All right. So, I didn't know. I didn't go to Harvard. Many of our listeners
the Harvard
didn't.
MIT Coop, I went to the bookstore to sign up to become a member, which I think gave us some kind of membership reward. And on the form, I ticked off professor. And the person behind the window crossed out professor and put student.
No, really?
And I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, you're a student." I said, "No, I'm a professor." And she said, "No, you're not." And I said, "No, really, I am. What would you like, a syllabus to prove that, in fact, I'm a professor?" And mind you, this is pre-iPhone days, so it's not like I had a bunch of stuff stored away on my iPhone to demonstrate that, in fact, I was online and a professor by whatever metric. And I didn't win the battle. I left. I was registered as a student. She reminded me that there were no greater benefits to faculty than to students. So even if I was telling the truth, it wouldn't make any difference. I was furious. I was irate. I went home. I called up the central phone number and demanded that this person be fired.
So, all right. So you were 27 when this happened?
Yes.
So 27 years old, by that time, you're now a full professor, which
No,
I don't
well,
know.
I was an assistant professor.
Assistant professor. Okay.
And
not
it was
yet
just shy of my first ever class. So I hadn't even seen the inside of a classroom at Harvard yet. And already I have this challenge, which was very comical, but that was nothing compared to the reaction of various audiences when they saw me as a presenter. I just think it was hard given my age. I was once invited by my students to give a keynote address at a Model UN session.
Mm-hmm.
And I got into a little argument with one of the high school teachers who thought that I was one of the students.
Okay.
And I gotta tell you, you can imagine his shock and horror to see me as the keynote about an hour after our interaction. But the funniest part was that my wife was holding our, at the time, 6-month-old baby off on the side, and he had apologized to my wife for my behavior, not knowing that I was her husband. So
oh my
it's
goodness.
one of my favorite stories about my interaction with an audience in those days, because he was convinced that I too was one of the high school students, or maybe one of the college students administering the Model UN. And yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed when he walked in the room. I gave him a little bit of a stare and he walked right back out. But the reality was that we all are up against these external images,
Yes.
or we are up against how our audiences perceive us. And for whatever people had in their mind as the look of a professor that
Yes.
might impart real wisdom, I was not that. And
Yes.
one thing that I learned from that experience was that you have about 5 minutes to win a crowd.
Yes.
And you had better come out hitting on all cylinders fast.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they're simply not going to give you the time of day for whatever perceptions they have of you. And at the time, it was that I was young. Maybe now it's that I'm too old. I don't know. Maybe life is non-linear in that regard. But I have to say that to this day, I hold to the line that, especially in that first outing, I have about 5 minutes to win the crowd. I have to be able to demonstrate that there is something that makes it worthwhile being in that room. And I honestly don't do introductions by and large. If you win those first 5 minutes, they'll look you up on LinkedIn. If you don't win those first 5 minutes, no one really cares where you did your degree. No one really cares how long you've been there. And these academic awards and whatnot mean nothing unless you win that crowd. So 5 minutes, you've got 5 minutes. And this is something that I'm sure motivated me in the class that you took with me, Janelle, to come out swinging and to make sure that my presence was felt in those first 5 minutes, and that I was going to be the guy at the front of the room that merited the attention of the audience by virtue of the fact that I had some cool stuff to say, for whatever you thought about my lack of dress or whatever you thought about my inability to seemingly shave that morning.
Well, we talked. You touched on the perceptions people have of you and how they frame the way they're going to react or respond to you based on a perception before you've opened your mouth and said anything. And here I am sitting in this class, having seen your bios, having seen your picture, and it's like, oh my God, this is some heavy-hitter professor. Oh my, not knowing what to expect. And you walk in, and I just, for lack of a better word, you came out as this character I was not expecting. And And I'm like, you were down to earth. You didn't give two flying fudges about anything or anyone in terms of your delivery because you were so passionate about the topic that it was very hard to not feel that contagion from you and get excited about the topic as well, right? You went there with some of the students, like you had that, you're like, I'm going to challenge that thinking. And you were all in 100%. And I got to tell you, Mark, there were times I'm like, this is the same professor. Like, look at that bio. Now, for everyone who's listening, you heard me introduce him. You hear this introduction of everything he's accomplished over his career. You see his picture. If you go to the website and you look at his picture and you see what he looks like, the picture conveys this traditional professor you expect to come and stand in front of you and drone on and on in monotone using words that didn't even make it to the SAT because it was just too complicated and nobody would pass the exam. And that wasn't what happened.
Well, and look what did happen, Janelle. At the first break in that class, you came up to me and you said, I'm going to change your life. It wasn't me saying to you as my student, I'm going to change your life. You came up to me and you said, I like you. I'm going to change your life. And here we are all these years later, and we continue to change each other's lives.
I think every interaction, everyone's here on this earth for a short season. And what better way of making use of this limited time we have than to try to make a positive impact in the lives we interact with, right? That you leave someone with a smile, you leave someone with a thought to help them reflect, to improve their lives or situations, or to help someone feel calmer after that interaction has ended, or to feel energized because now they've been imparted with knowledge they didn't have before that they can use to move on and move forward. And so here, I want to just take us back a little to, 30 years ago, 28 years ago, where you're in the bookstore and they're thinking you're a kid and you're just trying to get, pull off acting as being a professor, or being in the room to teach and having, other guests not realize you're the keynote speaker, or you didn't mention this, but I can only make an assumption that you walk into the class to teach and the other students are like, what are you what are you even doing here? Is Harvard trying to pull like a fast one on us because they couldn't find anybody to teach and they pull a kid and just say you're a professor? And yet we fast forward, you didn't quit, you didn't stop, you continued. What drove you to stay with it and not say, you know what, this is so demoralizing, I don't know if I want to continue with this?
I have to tell you, Janelle, in my first year teaching at Harvard, I wore a suit every day, which anybody who knows me today, anyone who takes a course with me today would find absolutely hilarious. Because I don't think I've worn a suit in a classroom since that first year, 28 years ago. But you're right, Janelle, I tried a little bit to play the role. I didn't want to disappoint. I didn't want to let down the class. I stopped doing that after the first year. After the first year, I wore jeans and topsiders, which is my want. Mm-hmm. And to this day, that's how I dress, despite lecturing in a business school or in the School of Foreign Service. I don't care. Maybe the truth is that I'm a bit of a contrarian and I enjoy the jostling a bit. And I have to tell you, I did enjoy the doubts at first. I remember in several undergraduate classes, I would get there a little bit early and I'd just take a seat next to the other students. And I'd look to the student next to me. I'd say, what have you heard about this guy? And they say something and I just respond. And then when I saw that the time was right, I stood up and I'd start lecturing. And I kind of got a kick out of that. So maybe there's that contrarian aspect to my personality, but I gave up trying to be what I thought they wanted me to be, and I became what I am, and they could take it or leave it. And the more firepower I brought to bear in terms of intellectual content and a little pizzazz, because being a professor is a bit about being an actor. It is performance art. And that kind of rote teaching is certainly not going to make it in today's day and age, but I have a passion for the content, and I don't mind standing on a desktop to convey the severity of something or the importance of something. And that has always been something that has made me a little different, if not a little odd, in the classroom.
We hear this being, touched on by so many of the, I would call, inspirational leaders, right? Being your authentic self. And what does that truly mean? Because for you to be your authentic self, you were pushing the boundaries of what is typically defined as the expectations of the behavior of a professor in the classroom, right? The bow tie, the monotonous droning on, right? Here's your exercise and just turn it in tomorrow. And you made a decision. You said, screw this. I'm going to bring my authentic self. I like wearing kegs or whatever shoes, the comfortable shoes that you wear with jeans and a polo shirt. I think that's what you wore when you came into Cornell, right? Blue jeans, and which is like, it's almost like I'm expecting you to walk in with a suit, right? Your bio, you're wearing a suit. And right. So you don't, and then you open your mouth and there is nothing monotonous about the way you speak, intonate the delivery of your lecture. And for everyone who's listening, like, this is literally how we spoke in class, right? The energy was there. The energy was there. And so when was that moment? What triggered the moment to make you say, you know what? Take it or leave it. I'm just going to be myself. I am tired of playing the role that I think people want me to play. I'm going to just be me. Take it as it is, or you're not going to get me at all. Was there a defining moment that helped you make that decision to be your authentic self?
There were two things probably that came into play. The first is that I wasn't good at not being me. So in all honesty, it wasn't winning long run strategy to play out, and something was going to have to give. The second thing is that I began to realize that I couldn't win every heart and mind in that classroom. And it is a revelation when you begin to plan for a future in which not everybody adores you. And so that backing away from the goal, as implausible as it is, to win everyone in the room allowed me to amend my ways and not pretend to be something I wasn't. And that sounds easier than it is. I've always been struck when I get teaching evaluations by how those couple of negative ones, and there always are, seriously sting. And I could get, say, a 4.8 out of 5 on teaching, and my first thought is, where did I go wrong? Why isn't it at 5? And so there's definitely a desire to win as much of the audience as I can, but it is almost a freeing up of my spirit to admit to myself, I can't take everybody here. And there's always someone in the room, sometimes two, who hate you. And that's okay. There's nothing I can do about that. That's always going to be true. And me wearing a suit and tie isn't going to convert them to my side. And me having a long, white, flowing beard isn't going to be the answer either. So in a very unapologetic way, those two factors came into play. And in my second year and ever since, I have worn what I wear, and I've done what I do, and I say how I say it. And one of my favorite moments was actually in an MBA theater where I did wear a suit because I had a meeting later on in the day, and one of the MBAs in the back of the room yells out, "Jeans in the wash, Mark?" And I thought, exactly. That is proof positive that they know me.
Yes.
They're getting me. And I'm just not good at being not me. And it really was an important thing for me to finally come to grips with, that in every class, there's going to be one or two people who hate me. And by hate, Janelle, I don't mean that they're kind of on the fence. I mean that I can be getting 5 out of 5s from everyone, and these 2 people will give me 1.
Oh my
Right?
goodness.
So 1 on he knows his subject, 1 on he's prepared. It's just antagonistic. And I'm sure, just like a lot of young people starting out their careers, it's difficult to process that. It's difficult to come to grips with the fact that not everybody is seeing you in the way that you would like to be seen. And I had to, perhaps a little faster than many, realize that that was my future, and that I was going to look to turn on a few light bulbs and win those who could handle me in jeans and as enthusiastic and as gung-ho as I was, and that for those who really wanted something else, well, I'm sorry that the date for ad drop has already passed.
This is fascinating beyond. And I say that because you're talking about a concept inside the classroom that is just as applicable in the world of business. And when we come back from the break, we are going to dive into the concept of the need to be liked, the recognition that you're not going to be able to make everyone happy, because this is something that many listeners I know kind of struggle with, whether they're working for someone and, understanding that in the delivery of their service, they're going to make, some people are just not going to like them. But do you use this as the stumbling block for not continuing where you are, for stopping, for changing, to finding something new? I'd like for us to kind of get more into that when we return, because I think there's so much more to talk about this particular, issue that comes up for many, many people. So we'll be right back. So we're back with Marc Busch, favorite professor at Georgetown University of the School of Foreign Service. And so just before the break, you were talking about the fact that, in bringing your authentic self, you've had to accept that not everyone's going to like it. Not every student's going to like you. And no matter how well or how passionate or what you brought to the classroom, there was just going to be that 1 or 2, whatever it is, there's always going to be someone in the classroom who's like, I can't stand it. I don't like you. You're not good. Your class sucks. And they'll come up with everything because they just aren't connecting with who you are. And, I really wanted us to unpack that because, during the day or during the week, I advise, business owners, law attorneys who own law firms, small law firms. And, that is a major issue when I'm advising them to say, okay, you need to identify who your ideal client is based on what the way you're delivering your service and who you're serving it for. And it's a struggle because, there's this need to be liked and wanting to create something for everyone, which does not work. I use the example of, Mercedes-Benz creates a particular type of vehicle at a certain price point, and they're not going to just lower their price because, there are people who make $40,000 or $20,000 and they're like, well, we need them to buy our car. No, they are unapologetic about the product and service that they deliver, and they deliver the best product, and deliver the highest level of service to that very specific customer. And what I'd like to, to hear from you, your thoughts on, especially for our listeners who struggle with this, who struggle with wanting to make everyone happy in the course of their career, thinking that this is the only way I could make it work. And what happens if when you are trying to make everybody happy and you're not being your authentic self, even if it pisses some people off?
Well, in theory, it would be great if the world loved us as much as we could possibly hope for and that everyone was on board. I don't mean to foo-foo the aspiration. What I mean to do is to suggest that it's not possible. And it's not possible for a variety of reasons that actually are good. I'm not backing away from my views. I'm not sidestepping my beliefs. I'm not betraying my values. And my hope for those who don't like me is that at a minimum they respect me. And they know that what they see is what they get. They may not like that, but they respect what it is. And so it wasn't so much that I made a clean break from the desire in my first year of teaching to have every student be completely enamored with me. It was that that's just not in the cards. I know that it's not in the cards. There's not a lot I can do to win the people who are relatively intransigent, and moreover, I will lose the ones that I do get if I try and do too much to win those I can't win. And this was something that really took me a while to come to grips with. And I can tell you that my wife would try and talk me through some of my teaching evaluations, which were very good, but I would always have this preoccupation with the one or two negative ones, and they would completely upend any achievement that had been won. And nonetheless, that is all I could remember from that semester. So later in life, obviously, it's not just in the classroom, it's me, myself, and I. There are people who don't like me, and that's not something that is in my control. But again, so long as I can explain myself, so long as I can outline why it is that I believe what I do, and so long as that's somewhat logically consistent, then maybe a little bit of respect is there, maybe a lot of respect is there. I don't know. Maybe there's just complete antipathy. But even if that's where we are, there's not a goddamn thing I can do about it.
Right? Isn't that something where when you get to that point of saying, you know what, you acknowledge, first you have to acknowledge, not everyone's going to like me. Not everyone's going to like you. Not everyone's going to like the way you do things. Some people are just not even going to like the way you breathe.
Right.
But that's not a me problem, right? That's like a you problem. If you've got an issue, because it's not to say I'm just going to write you off, right? Because you don't like me. And I don't know if we can even expect that they'll respect who our individual personality is. I can only control what I feel about you, even if you don't like me. And I can respect that you don't like me. I can see the human in you and then say, I get that you don't really vibe with who I am and my personality. So I see that, I acknowledge that, and I respect that that's how you feel and that's what you're entitled to. And I need to continue in the course of my day, in the course of my business, in the course of living without taking it personally. But a lot of us tend to take it personally. We tend to take the criticism as some sort of truth about who we are and what we do. So we respond to it. We respond to it with, anxiety. We respond to it with anger. We respond to it. We give it a response, which I think in and of itself gives it power. Right? I think you're in foreign service, right? You're teaching international trade and in the business school. But what would your reaction be if someone from the culinary school came and said, Mark, you know something? I don't like how you were teaching about, the World Trade Organization, because I just don't think you quite get it. You probably wouldn't even engage that person. You'll be like, okay, thank you for your opinion. You'll turn around and you just laugh because you're like, it's not even worth my time to engage that person because they're not an expert in this where you are. Just as, right, you probably wouldn't engage in the science of baking in the surface area of the types of sugar and how it affects food with someone who's a culinary specialist. And I say that because I think we sometimes lose who we are, right? Like we lose who we are. We give our power to others who don't accept us for who we are.
I'd probably have the conversation with the professor of culinary studies. I'd be curious to know why it is that in their estimate I was so wrong about something. I have done this several times. I got to tell you, I was once skating on the Rideau Canal in Ottawa with my son, and a protest in Ottawa had just let out, and a whole bunch of these anti-trade types were running across the canal, and my son asked, what are they protesting? And I said, let's go find out. So we skated up to a couple of them and engaged them in conversation. I'm sure they hated me more after the conversation than before, but it was certainly interesting. It was enlightening. I don't think you can do anything substantive if you don't have some people who hate you after you try. And as a result, I'm not terribly upset with the idea that, assuming we all have a normal distribution of preferences on something, that I'm going to lose some. And it's not the end of the world, but if I can get a quick handle on what it is that a critic feels, that's great. If I can learn from it, if I can broaden my message by speaking to it more fully, that's terrific. I once had a colleague challenge me to give a presentation on the WTO at a conference I knew was going to be outwardly hostile to everything that I said. And exactly as per expectation, I didn't open my mouth before there were boos from the crowd.
But you went anyway.
And it was fascinating. I mean, notwithstanding that I barely escaped, but it was fascinating. And my colleague was right. It would be a crying shame to go through life only speaking to groups of the converted. And I saw it as a challenge. Ironically, he didn't see it as a challenge because he more or less got up and said, well, everything that you've heard about is probably more in Busch's bailiwick, so I'm going to let him answer all your questions. And he kind of stepped to the side of the stage and the rest was on me. But boy, did I learn. And did that make me a better messenger? You bet. It gave me something to keep in mind as I gave my lectures to classes that were more interested in what I had to say. And I would point out that there are some who object for this reason or that reason. And yeah, I gave it my best shot, but not going to win everybody. And I'm really not going to try. And luckily, there are lots of other people that some of these critics can listen to that will satiate their demands, whatever those may be. But I just can't try and meet every person's preference. And the earlier you learn that, the happier your life professionally and personally going forward.
There are, a couple of schools of thought on that. There's a saying I had put up on my LinkedIn not too long ago. And the saying was, the honeybee does not stop to explain to the fly why honey is better than shit. Now, it's funny, you could chuckle of it when you get it, but I think what that alludes to is, when as we're going through life, as we're defining what success means, as we are trying to live more authentically into who we are as a human in the interactions with other humans, that because we're not going to be everybody's cup of tea, right? That trying to allow, those who don't want to hear what you have to say to, elicit a reaction out of you, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. I 100% agree that we should have dialogue with those who don't believe as we do. Otherwise, life would be boring. But it's sometimes difficult to have those conversations or interact with others when, many people are listening to respond. They're not listening to hear the other person and understand that perspective and where they're coming from, which is why I love having these types of conversations. I speak with many people, some who have like amazing careers, such as you do. I have people who are now starting off in their journey for a career, because I mentor first generation college students and then everybody in between. And everyone seems to have a perception of everyone that's just built in their mind, the stories they tell themselves about what the journey must have been like for someone. So someone like you, when someone reads that bio of yours, that you just had it, you always just had success laid out for you, that you just knew what you're going to do, that you didn't have challenges, that, you know, for someone to hear your story of not being believed early in your career, where for some people they would have quit or they would have stopped and said, this is just not for me because they keep treating me like I'm a kid. They're not respecting me. They're not, whatever it is. And then they stop, right? Or they don't stop, but decide that in order to stay, I have to be who I'm not. And then they're not fulfilled, and then they're not happy. And then they reach 20 years of service and it's like, well, I guess I can't do anything else now. I can't redefine my story because this is all I know, right? You can't teach an old dog new tricks. And, you know, this is something that I would love to hear your perspective on. You've been doing, you know, you've been a professor for 28 years at Harvard, at these amazing academic institutions. And you're known for this. You know this inside and out. And is the purpose that you have, is your definition of what success is and what purpose is for you, is it the same today as it was 28 years ago? And if it's changed, what was that changed?
It's not even in the same ballpark. And I started out, obviously, it was to meet the criteria for promotion. And this is another thing I'd say. One of the life lessons from my career that I love to tell my students about is be ready for the unexpected, because there's always a new opportunity that may not be obvious, but it comes around and you don't have a lot of time to deliberate on whether to act, and you make a decision that could change the entire trajectory of your career. When I first started, like everyone else, I needed to support a young family. I had my son at 27, and I had a daughter 3 years later, and I wasn't paid a lot, and I needed to get promoted, and I did what I had to do to get promoted, and I fought that fight as well as I could, and success was publications or teaching evaluations, etc. Much like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I guess, as soon as you begin to fill in the gaps and you gain some sustenance and some sustainability for your family, you begin to think about broader things. And there are a lot of things today that I would define as success that I really don't imagine I would have contemplated at 27. Like you, Janelle, I also enjoy tremendously helping my students find their beginning careers, find their happy places in corporate America. That's a real big thing for me. I love the opportunities that come around for me to translate a very complicated subject for audiences that aren't technically up to speed on something like the WTO, like US trade policy. And I also have a desire just to leave an imprint. And I would like, for example, to make sure that when I'm done teaching, that there is as large a group of students, including yourself, who fondly remember what I said, that even if it never led them to want to do something in trade, led them to realize that my enthusiasm for my subject matter was infectious and you needed to find yours. And if you think back on our conversations over the past few years, Janelle, that's really been it. Mm-hmm. Both of us helping each other find our goals, our aspirations, and I'd like to give back. I'd like to give back here in the United States. I'd like to give back more in Canada. I was raised in Vancouver, BC, and my father and I lived on welfare for several years because he was an alcoholic who drank himself out of his career. And my ability to finish my college, to start my college, was largely because of the government of Canada having some programs to help people who didn't have the money to pay for tuition. And I feel an obligation to give back. And I'd like to, and it's something that matters a lot to me. But would that have been something that I would have seen at 27? No, but not because I wasn't of that mindset, but because I couldn't imagine having the ability, the opportunity to sit back and do something like that. And I'm involved in a whole bunch of charitable efforts and a whole bunch of educational programs on both sides of the US-Canada border. And it gives me tremendous satisfaction to make what little token gestures I can for the sake of those who come next. And that's pretty exciting.
What you just, spoke about in terms of your humble beginnings, right? Rough. I would say was rough. Right, was not the predictor of how you were going to end up turning out in life, right? Which is amazing, incredible what you've achieved. And, this is something that I always find so powerful. It's something that gets lost on many people. You had a rough beginning, but even when you were 27 and becoming a professor, it's not like you could have known what success would look like 30 years into the future. There's no way you could have known. And here's one of the things that I really, struggle with, that, kids today, right? For any parent who's listening, right? This year is not really for the kids. This is, you've got kids, you've got teenagers. I have teenagers, right? Or you've got kids getting ready to go to college, or they're in college. And the incredible pressure we put on them to know exactly what they should be doing by the time they're 18, or when they graduate college from at the age of 23, 24, 25, whenever that is. And what does that translate to into the adult when they have kids of their own, where they've made a decision not really knowing what they should be doing based on who they are, because they just had to follow this trajectory of just doing. And see, what you mentioned was, in the beginning, you were just trying to make it to promotion, making more money and which is very different from saying, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what gives me purpose. And I'm bringing my all into it because I feel fulfilled. And there's value in it that people are willing to pay for, right? And being able to connect the two. It's not just, I like to smell flowers and it makes me happy, right? You extract value by giving value. That, we turn up for 30 years later, 20 years later as adults, not quite satisfied with the life we've lived, not having taken the risk to say, okay, even if you're doing what you enjoy doing, bringing your authentic selves to it. When I think of, the person today, when I think of the adult today who made a decision when they were in high school to pursue a certain career, which was probably triggered by, I need to make more money and not a sense of purpose, and felt stuck, meaning that, yes, they were getting the satisfaction of making a nice paycheck and taking care of their family, but they're feeling hollow. What would your thoughts be today when you're thinking about what we're defining success is today as an adult, as somebody who's, whether you're 40, 45, 50, 55, whatever that age is, you've had life experience behind you. Like, how do you make a change into feeling more purposeful in how you're delivering what you're delivering? It doesn't mean quitting your job, right? It doesn't mean that. We're not talking about that. But what is that thought process like in redefining what purpose means to you?
Immediately, the thing that comes to mind is the fact that I've raised 4 children, and helping them find their passion has been an awful lot of fun and very rewarding for me, in the sense that none of them have followed immediately in my footsteps. And it's been wonderful to see that. I've told all my children that I'm sufficiently self-confident in my career that I don't need to replicate myself in them. And I've found opportunities for them that are both challenging and rewarding. And I've encouraged them to go and find that love. And I'm really proud of my son, for example, who took me at my word and is currently in his second year at NYU Film School.
Wow.
And I warned him before he went, there are a lot of baristas in the world, and you might be one of them. And he did it anyway, and all the more power to him for finding and acting on that love. There was nothing certain about success in what he decided to do. He knew the costs, literally. He knew that it was a risky proposition, and he's actually winning international film festivals right now. So
wow, congratulations.
God bless. Absolutely. It's been wonderful I remember my daughter called me from a job fair. She went to Georgetown, as have three of my children. And she said, I'm at a job fair and I'm interviewing. I said, oh, who are you interviewing with? And she says, no one you'd care about, Dad. And I said, all the more power to you. You do what you need to do. But aside from our children, and obviously we love our children and we learn from them and we help them as much as we can, I have to say that I've been part of a mentorship program helping veterans transition into the private sector after their military careers. And that's not only been humbling, but tremendously rewarding. It's called Veterati, and it's spelled exactly as it sounds, veterati.com. And it was started by a student of mine here at Georgetown who wanted to make an impact on the lives of transitioning soldiers who don't really understand what their options are once they leave the military. And I have to say that having now been to several functions for military people to figure out the private sector, so much more has to be done. And Veterati is a really nice effort to gain mentors for these transitioning military officials, for these soldiers and Marines and seamen. And it's really something that I have admired for many years, and to this day keep in touch with so many of my mentees as they navigate life. And it's been something that has kept me a little more focused and a little more excited. And again, I can only reach so many people, but I take so much pleasure in the few people that I can reach. And that has been rewarding in itself. It's not that I need to be a rock star on a stage pleasing 60,000 fans. If I can reach out and help some people that count in a number that looks like single digits even, so be it. But I have to say that has been truly rewarding. More time should be given to mentoring. It's something of such great value. It's probably even more important than the dollars that we donate. The mentorship can be life-changing. And wow, the nice thing is that at a certain age, you have the car payments under control, you have the mortgage somewhat under control, and you can begin to diversify a bit more and take on some more of these charitable efforts or these mentorship efforts. And that's something that I think I will do for the rest of my life, because it's been far more rewarding than I could have ever imagined.
Mentoring is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly powerful. And I'd like to talk about mentoring in two aspects. The mentoring we do now that, for many of the listeners, you're listening to this conversation, most likely you're someone you've got some life experience, and you've got something to share with someone who is, who could learn from what you have experienced. And then also mentoring as someone who, to grow, because we should never stop growing. And sometimes I think, we forget to invest in ourselves to get to level up beyond where we are, because the human potential is unlimited, right? It is unlimited. We just don't know how much we can accomplish unless we water it, feed it, grow it to take us beyond where we currently are. But let's talk about that first level of mentoring that you're talking about. So you're now at this point in your career. You've been, this esteemed professor for 28 years, right? You've got almost 3 decades under your belt in academia. And what you started off when you were 27 in terms of paying bills, getting promoted, getting tenured, and security has evolved over the years into now you are giving more purpose and meaning to the people you're interacting with and teaching or mentoring. There is, so the program that I volunteer with, it's called America Needs You. It's the first generation. They pair first generation college students with mentors. It's a phenomenal program. It's in the Northeast. And I'm hoping eventually they bring it to Houston, where I'm based out of now. I only recently moved here recently. And the young man that I'm paired with, right? He is here in the US on an asylum visa. So when I met him, this was in 2019, right? It's the fall of 2019. He had only been speaking English for 5 years, his first language. It's French and Arabic. And he was in community college. And when we met, he indicated that his life's goal is to become an attorney. He wants to study law because eventually he wants to be able to return to his country because he escaped. He was drafted into the military as a kid. And, you know, it's a ravaged country in terms of civil conflict. And he wants to be able to make a change in the governmental policies that's there, which is taller, that's huge. But his why, right? Why he wants to do this. His family is still there. His mom is still there. You know, everyone that he's connected to by blood is still there. He was able to make it out. And now he has this opportunity. And, you know, we were talking, and this is where, you know, in terms of mentoring, because he has this goal, he has this lofty goal, but the power of mentoring in his life was he wanted to go to, you know, the top schools. He wanted to transfer from community college. I was still in New Jersey at the time, and he applied. He wanted to go to Princeton University. And I asked him, I said, why are you choosing Princeton University? And this is just a testament to the circle that you surround yourself with, right? He's a community college, and everyone in New Jersey, if you're in a small town in New Jersey, Princeton's the place you go to because it's the best university in the state. So I had to have this conversation with him. I said, okay, what is your goal? Your goal is you want to study law. Princeton doesn't have a law program, but you're situated in the tri-state region. So if you want to go to a top school, why not consider a program that has a track for law, such as NYU, Columbia, even Pennsylvania University, right? They've got great law programs. And he was hesitant. He was actually hesitant. He's like, no, I got to go to Princeton. But thank God he was in this mentoring program. He had no choice but to listen to me. So I didn't tell him to not apply to Princeton. I said, go ahead and apply to Princeton, but I also would like you to apply for these other schools. And in the course of applying to the schools, his writing was atrocious. Didn't understand beginning, middle, or end, like just the structure of it. I'm like, oh my God, we have so much work to do. But here was a student who was getting straight A's in community college. And his mindset was, what are you talking about? My professors told me I write so well. And I asked him, I said, did any of your professors teach at any of the Ivy League universities that you're trying to go into? Because if they did, then I take my words back. And he said, no. I said, I need you to trust the process. I need you to open your minds up. And so he did. And we worked hard on his essays. We had to go back and forth. And he was not happy because I pushed hard. I'm like, beginning, middle, and end. Tell me what you're going to write about. Write about it. Tell me what you just wrote about it. Just the structure. Just get it, you know. But he was a good student and he got it. And he ended up getting a full scholarship to Columbia University, full ride, room and board. He ended up applying for, at my direction, getting an internship over the summer at Goldman Sachs. And if he graduates from Columbia University with a 3.5 GPA, he gets $150,000 towards grad school. Now, he was very resistant in the beginning to the mentoring, but a year later, he's sitting there with his resume updated, sitting in this, prestigious school. And I said, no, I'm going to suggest that you consider Harvard for law. He's like, all right, I won't argue. Right. But his perception, and we've talked about this, where when it comes to mentoring, it's great to give our experience to others, but even for ourselves as adults, right? I am now getting mentoring. There's this program I didn't do it, today. But there's this program through my job that, I work for this, company where we provide advisory services, executive advisory services for law firms. And a big component of this role that I'm in is mentoring for me as an advisor. And the mindset, and I have to say that I have grown so much because, yes, I have years of experience. And it's one of the challenges, where do you find the mentoring? How can you yourself grow, continue growing as you help others growing? Right? Someone will look at you and think, oh my God, you're amazing. But Mark, you're human. Where would you find that circle? Where would you find the resources so that you could continue to evolve? Because if you're not evolving, if you're not growing, we all know it, you're dying. Are there resources that's available? Because someone who's listening might think, like, where could I go? I mean, this show is going to be one of them. They're going to hear people like you. They're going to hear some amazing people talking about their experiences, and, it'll be a form of mentorship. But for yourself personally, is there a circle that you find that you get value from to help you redefine the way you think about what you want out of life?
I get friends who start things. I have friends who are participants in things. And now I have a whole bunch of veterans who invite me to participate in programs that they themselves launch after they found their footing. So I have to say that in my case, it's been word of mouth. But there are lots of things online, and I have to say that I've also been shocked by how many different types of opportunities there are. And what I would also recommend to your listeners is that they realize that the bar's pretty low in terms of returns on your efforts, that you're not being required by someone you mentor to necessarily change their lives in one conversation, that simply by providing the benefits of some of your insight, you can have a profound influence on how they think about what they can do for themselves. And the Veterati program has been very humbling in this regard. I'm usually chosen as a mentor when someone is considering going on to do an MBA or a master's degree. And I had this one guy tell me that he had been offered admission to a school that I wasn't terribly bullish on. And I asked him, why this school? And he said, well, they took me and I want my daughters to be proud of me. And I was so moved by that. I said, my God, you're EOD. You've been defusing bombs in Afghanistan. Your daughters are proud of you. We all are proud of you. You don't need to do this to have your family and others be proud of you. And he was surprised that I was surprised. And that interaction really motivated me to reach out to more and more of these veterans, because my God, is that what they're thinking?
Yes.
That they've got to go to a school to have a credential that will make us a grateful nation? My God, you're EOD. You actually defuse bombs. You are a hero to everyone who's ever seen you show up. This degree doesn't do that for you, man. You've already done that, and you inspire your mentors. And that is something I probably didn't appreciate as much when I started getting involved, that it doesn't take a life-changing moment to make a contribution, that helping someone figure out a way forward, helping someone figure out how they're viewed is often sufficient to be enough. And that little shove and that little bit of inspiration is kind of what I try and deliver each time I get a new mentee.
Well, you did that to me. We had that conversation where I was thinking about, this, another prior endeavor. And I'm like, Mark, I'm not sure. And you were like, good. You're like, good. You're not supposed to be sure. It's the overconfident idiots that tend to screw things up. Like, and I'm like, oh my God, I never thought about it that way.
And look where we are, Janelle. We're on your radio show, and you belong in radio doing exactly what you're doing and helping all the people that you're reaching out to. This is your calling. It's always been your calling. And I knew that as soon as I started teaching you because you wanted to do it for me. And that's the funny part to this. It is not the professor who led the student. In many ways, it's the student who took the professor by the schnoz and said, this is the bigger picture. And I thank you for that. But that's kind of why I keep coming back for more, Janelle. I mean, who in their right mind would otherwise have this kind of therapy session online for people to hear, were it not for the fact that I know the price of admission and this is what I'm going to do to make sure that you stay a part of my life.
These conversations, I'm so grateful that you agreed to be this honest and raw and vulnerable. I find that these conversations would happen in my life, no matter where I am. Some of the future guests that's going to come on are people that, the conversations was just like mind blowing, but it tends to happen in little bubbles. And I want to take the conversations out of the bubbles and have a wider audience because there's so much content out there that people can choose to listen to. There is so much. And, I want this to be something that's meaningful, that, for someone who's listening, for someone who's, had this career and had a certain way of thinking, that as they hear these stories, as they see that, this idea that a career or life or, that it's linear is this fallacy that does not exist at all. And when you understand that it doesn't exist and you've got your goal, right? And this is the name of the show, GoalPost, right? The path to the end is all in your head. It's about the stories we tell ourselves about what it would take to get where we'd like to be. And we don't go for it because there's this perception, well, in order for me to do this, right? Like, as you just used the example of this veteran who believes that in order for me to be respected, I need to have this degree, right? Telling the story as though what he's done before wasn't sufficient for him to be accepted and to be relevant, right? This pursuit of relevancy defined as he saw it for himself. And so how do we have these conversations? Where do we get, we talk about the stories we tell ourselves, and to maybe have this moment where you realize, what have I been telling myself? Like, why did I think that this is what I need to do this? I can go for it. I can do it. And guess what? If I fail, there isn't really I don't believe in failure. I don't believe that the word failure exists. I believe that it's a teaching moment because you learn from it and you grow.
And the failures come along quite frequently. And I have to say that, to your point about life being nonlinear, wow, there are failures and trials and tribulations at every turn of events. And it's fun being at my age now because I can be much more open and much more forthcoming than I probably would have been at a younger age. But I can tell you this, I was broke at Harvard. My wife and I had nothing. And my wife and I were struggling terribly. And I thought about leaving. And I went and did first round interviews with McKinsey, the consulting firm. Mm-hmm. And I got invited to the second round. And something funny happened along the way. I had this class that I was teaching the night I got word that I was invited to New York for second round at McKinsey. And the students, for some crazy reason, they knew that my wife was pregnant, and they got me a whole bunch of these little baby gifts. And one student handed them to me and said, "Thank you, Professor Busch. You make this all make sense." And I walked home, and I'm sure that there were a few tears in my eyes. And I said to my wife, "I know we're broke, but I got to do it. I got to stay the course. Somehow, somewhere in the future, it's going to be easier. But you got to let me ride this one out. I just got to see how this turns out, because I don't know how good I'm going to be going back to consulting full time. But I really feel this. I got to do this." I've only told a few students this story over my 26 years since it happened. But it was a really monumental moment where, like you say, there was this incredible failure staring me in the face. I couldn't afford my fucking car payments. But I asked my wife just to ride this one out with me. I didn't know what was going to happen, and fortunately, something did happen. I ended up getting a consulting gig with Monitor, which smoothed the way for me to really stay a professor. That was lucky, and I got the chance to work off in 2 years what I thought was going to take me a lifetime. But, yeah, that was a failure staring me in the face. And I didn't quite know how I was going to explain it to my kids one day, that I had to walk away. And no one in the real world could have understood what I was going through. I was a Harvard professor. It sounded terrific. Are you kidding me? They paid me shit.
Yes.
And it was a scale salary based on what I taught, and I made nothing. And wow, that was a tough world. But the support of my wife and a feeling that, yeah, it was going to take a while, but life would get better, enabled me to see through what has now turned into a 28-year career. And for me, I got to say that support was everything, because had I been a rational, conscientious father, I would have jumped at anything that paid anything more than what I was making. I took 6 years at Harvard to break the $45,000 mark, and
wow.
I made nothing. So when you start off life with your son, who in our case was premature and ended up coming with $11,000 of debt that wasn't covered by insurance, we got hammered. And it's really tough to explain to yourself why it is that you're looking for an off-ramp. But what I want to make clear from this little story is that, as you said, the off-ramp and the failure that I saw it bearing out for me was actually a tremendous impetus. It reoriented me. It got me going. And I learned to try and figure out ways to make what I wanted to do work. And that was something that didn't come naturally, but now it does. And so chalk that one up as having been a positive life experience that gave me an edge that I dare say not a lot of my colleagues had back in those days, because they didn't have to. And that kind of double, triple booking teaching classes to make a couple extra grand here and there, and then finding Monitor. Sometimes you got to be a little creative in dealing with would-be defeats.
I really believe that almost everything great that's been accomplished in this world was accomplished because at some point in that journey, something traumatic, something that seemed like a failure happened that redirected or, solidified the path that innovator, and I say innovator very broadly, right, had to stay on. Because had you not made that decision 26 years ago, you and I would not be speaking today. Highly improbable that we would have been speaking today. And right now, we have no idea who's listening to this conversation, right? We have no idea who is saying, I'm there right now. Oh my God, right? Because it goes back to the stories we tell ourselves. And sometimes the stories we tell ourselves comes from the collective. There's this book that I highly encourage, anyone to read, The Voice of Knowledge. The Voice of Knowledge, and I believe it's by Don Miguel Ruiz. And The Voice of Knowledge is, about the stories that the collective tells us, in terms of society, right? You're a father, you have a baby, you have a wife, you have no money, but you have this prestigious, on the surface looking job with no one understanding the realities behind it and the choices that you were being faced with. And the collective, in that circumstances from the outside looking in, would have the story of, if you left Harvard, it's because you couldn't cut it, right? That something was wrong with you without an understanding of the stories behind, right? what was triggering your decisions and your thought process. But then having that one, and I think, everything happens for a reason. The universe, it knew you needed to have that moment with that student who handed you the gifts for your baby, to make you understand this is where you're going to make the most difference. And somehow you didn't know how that it was going to work out. That little decision of saying, I am going to do it, even though I am not sure. You faced your fear of uncertainty and you didn't let it stop you. And when I tell you, Marc, this is the story that is consistent in pretty much almost everyone I'm going to have on this show. Everyone who has had some, like on the surface, everything just looks amazing, right? It looks, the shiny object, but then you get under it and you realize that they faced uncertainty like you wouldn't believe. They faced challenges and fears, and they didn't use that. They didn't say, I'm going to stop because of it. Maybe fell down, maybe felt knocked out, but getting back up and having a reignited sense of purpose in achieving, in going, in continuing. And so many people tell themselves a story about why they can't continue, or why they can't do this, or why they can't, not realizing the power in the words that they're saying. You can't because you're saying that you can't, not because you actually can't. And you don't have to have it all figured out and mapped perfectly in order to make a step forward. Sometimes you just have to have faith. It's risky and it's scary. Oh my gosh, it's like the scariest concept. Right. And, once I think you apply it into your personal life and you realize, Will Smith had said it when he was talking about going skydiving and how afraid he was, how scared, and he wanted to quit, didn't want to do it, and going up and all the fear. And, he articulated it so well and saying, your greatest joy is on the other side of fear.
Well, for me, it was a line from Sting. Sting has a song in which he sings, I wish I never woke up this morning. Life was easy when it was boring.
Life is easy when it's boring, but it's forgettable. It's unfulfilling.
And sometimes you got to be risk acceptant. And the success stories that we are supposed to read about in these books that we are supposed to buy at the airport and places like that, nothing was locked down in terms of being an obvious win in the making. Our stories that we rehearse, like Hewlett and Packard making their first, second, and third oscillator in their garage. It's a great story. It's a risk acceptance story, but we are all up against that, and you've got to at times take risks and get out of your comfort zone and find things that are going to help you evolve. It's not always easy, but you need an environment in which failure is tolerated, because we do fail. And
we do.
We crash, we burn, we have embarrassing failures, and we have less embarrassing failures. But the reality is that we do fail, and there's nothing that makes that less painful with age. It hurts today as much to get a paper rejected in an academic journal as it did when I was 27. And that is good, because it's what motivates me to try and be a little bit better.
Yes.
And we in academia have this saying, A people hire A people and B people hire C people. And the one thing that I would urge your listeners to contemplate is the need to be around A people. Don't be around people who make you feel better about yourself. Be around people who make you better.
Yes. Yes. You know what? We're going to take a very short break, and we're going to come back and we're going to unpack that last statement you made, because it is so powerful. And I think it deserves a little bit more attention. So we'll be right back after the break. Okay, so we're back from the break, and I'm sitting here with Marc Busch, as I've said earlier, my favorite professor while I was doing my MBA program at Cornell. And, he's a professor at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University in DC. And just before the break, Mark said something so powerful. And we're going to unpack that a little here with, be with people who challenge you, not people, who are just going to tell you yes and just make you feel good, because that's the only way you can grow. That's the only way you can evolve. And, we're in different industries, right? We're not in the same industry. And this is a concept that I'm hoping we can really convey and impress to everyone who's listening. It does not matter if you are a teacher. It does not matter if you're a janitor. It doesn't matter if you're an executive. It does not matter if you are a stay-at-home parent. The people you surround yourself by will have an influence in the direction of your life and the achievement of your goals. And so you said the saying in academia is that A people hire A people and B people hire C people, right? Let's break that down. Break that down for me, Mark. For those who are like, oh, I get it, but there would be a reason I would hire somebody who's less. Break that down for me. Why do you want to hire A people and not a B hiring a C?
The intuition is that A people like to be around people who make them smarter, people they can learn from, people they can aspire to being more like in terms of their technique, their way of asking a question, their way of seeing the question from a unique angle. Mm-hmm. But most people in life are going through looking to be surrounded by people who make them feel good about themselves, that make them feel relatively bright, relatively creative, relatively whatever. And that could be tempting for so many reasons, including a sense of self-worth. But there's something very freeing about simply conceding that you're surrounding yourself with people who are brighter than you are. And I always point out that my co-authors have all been selected on that basis. I choose people who are going to force me to think about things differently, who are going to force me to think about things more broadly, in the sense that I like research topics that are very narrow but deep. And my 3 co-authors in my career have all been really good at pulling me back up to 34,000 feet. Now, I don't go to 34,000 feet willingly. I fight it all the way up. But I admire their skills. I admire their ability to reason and to come up with an appropriate methodology for empirically assessing a hypothesis. I'm okay saying I'm not the smartest person in the room. That's not always been the case. When I started out, sure. Did I want to be the smartest person in the room? Who doesn't want to be? But it's kind of like when you play a sport. I grew up playing hockey in Canada. And I always imagined that maybe I was going to make it to the NHL. But the better you get, the better the team you're on, the better the people you're around, the more you realize it ain't happening. And while I'm delighted to say that several of my line mates went to the NHL, I did not. And yet those players made me better to this day, even though I have long since hung up my skates. And to me, it's so wonderful to be open and able to say that my pursuit of co-authors is because I want to be around people who make me do things and help me do things I couldn't otherwise do. And that's why I would like to think of myself as an A person, and I like to be around A people. And the idea that I would seek out people who weren't as good as me on whatever dimension as a way of making myself feel better about myself seems not really something that would make me better off in any tangible sense, other than whatever it is that leads to this intuition that A hires A and B hires C.
I want to take what you're saying and make it even more practical for everyone who's listening. All right. Because maybe you're listening and you're thinking, well, he's a professor and he's writing books and I want to bring home how important what he said is, regardless of what you do in your life. Break your life down into let's start at home. All right. If you've reached a certain part of your career, surround yourself by people who are better than you. You might clean your own home because you can, you always have, but guess what? There are people who could do it better than you. And you could hire someone to come in and clean your house and show you how to clean your house better than you ever thought. But it probably never crossed your mind because the thinking that you have of cleaning your own home comes from a thought of people who had no choice but to. It probably never crossed your mind that you could probably have a cleaner home by surrounding yourself with someone who is better at it than you are. Or your taxes. If you make a certain level of income and you've started in your career and you've grown and your income has grown, are you using the same H&R Block, or are you elevating who's helping you and giving you advice with your taxes in a way that is more appropriate for someone who is aspiring to a certain level of wealth? That's a tax strategist. That's not a CPA. In your life, you look at who you're surrounded by in everything that you do. And that adage that says, show me your friends, I'll show you who you are, is not just for teenagers. Doesn't matter how old you are. If you're living in a neighborhood and everyone looks like you, talks like you, drives the same car that you do, you will always remain that way because that's who you're surrounded by. Get out of your comfort zone. Go eat at a restaurant that you're not used to eating because it's too fancy. And if that makes you feel uncomfortable,
good.
Ask the question, why is that making you feel uncomfortable? It's triggering parts of you that hasn't been triggered in a long time.
I like to tell the story of my son fencing. Fencing is a weird sport because you could fight people who are way better than you as a matter of course. And one time my son was in a fencing tournament. He was fighting épée, and he ended up being matched against a U.S. Olympian.
Woo! Okay.
So the U.S. Olympian beat my son to the requisite number of touches in about 25 seconds. And my son took off his mask and shook hands with his rival and walked off the mat. And it was clear that my son was intent on taking it very personally. And I went up to him and I said, you were never going to win that match. The question is, what do you do in the wake of your failure? You can mope, and I'm fine having no discussion whatsoever in the 2.5-hour car ride home from this match. Or you can look at this as an opportunity to ask a U.S. Olympian how you can get better.
Yes.
What are you going to do with your remaining time here? Because I'll go and wait for you in the car if that's what you'd like.
Yes.
And I get it. The loss hurts. That number of touches in that few seconds doesn't make anyone walk out beaming. But the guy is on the U.S. Olympic team.
Learn something
from him. And I gotta say, there are a lot of things that I like to do that I'm not very good at. One of them happens to be off-roading with my Jeep. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, there are times where I've had the courage to go up to someone and say, why did you do that with your tires? Why did you do that with your winch? How did you figure out how to do that? You've got to go through life being willing to ask questions. You can't see that as a sign of weakness.
It is not.
You've got to learn.
I couldn't agree with you more. And being surrounded by people doesn't necessarily mean being in their presence, because that's not always going to be possible. They probably have videos. Go find the video. They have a podcast on audio. Go find that. They probably wrote a book. Go read the book. Years ago, I used to bake. I used to bake a lot, and I got really good at it, like custom cakes, the kind of stuff you'd see on Cake Boss. I didn't start off that way. In fact, the first cake I ever baked, I guess I didn't put, the rising agent in it. Couldn't even cut the cake. It was hard as a rock. But I was determined to learn how to bake. And when I had kids, that's where I really got, the drive to want to learn how to make cakes and get custom cakes, because custom cakes are very expensive to buy. And when my first daughter, she was turning 3, right? Wanted to give her a princess party and have a castle cake. And, I was quoted like $600 for this darn cake. I'm like, oh no, I want to make this thing myself. And that started me on a journey, right? Here I am. I don't know how to bake. I was working full time. I have kids. I don't have time to go take a class, like physically go take a class. And what I started doing was going on YouTube. And I would find, there were all these amazing bakers who created these videos on certain techniques. And I would spend hours and hours watching these videos and then trying the technique. And so what started off as one cake and me trying to like make a little cake for my daughter, every time my kids would have a birthday party or I'd bake a cake at a family function, my skill improved. And then I started getting people asking me to bake cakes for them until I actually had like a following. And I mean, I learned how to make cakes like dragons, and I did a zombie cake with like rotting flesh, all edible, all skill, something. But in order for me to learn that, people are like, oh my gosh, you're so good. I'm like, I'm so good. Have you not seen the talent that's out there? Like, it's amazing. And I just couldn't get enough of learning from those who were experts in and of themselves, not like paying attention to the fact that my own skill was increasing by doing that. Now that's just baking. But this is applicable for pretty much everything and anything. I'm on TikTok. I love TikTok. I'm a huge TikTok fan. And for anyone who's listening, you can follow me there. And when I joined TikTok, everyone likes to say, oh, it's a kid's app. And I'm like, get your head out of your, pardon my French, get your head out of your ass. TikTok is the most visited site on the planet. It surpassed Google. So if you think Google is only visited by kids, what do you think TikTok is, right? It's not. It is huge. And I go on TikTok and there are all these professionals on there. Marc, you'd be surprised. Professionals, that's not just kids. Professionals in how to put on makeup. I have learned how to put on makeup because of TikTok. Professionals in estate planning and giving advice about things that you need, you should consider. They're not telling you exactly what to do, but things you should consider in your life at a certain age. Professionals about cooking. Like I finally learned how to actually boil an egg. I have cooked eggs my entire life, Marc. But now I know there's an actual process to boil an egg so that you don't get the little gray ring in it. So it's perfectly yellow.
Wow.
Right? There's an actual process. Who knew? Right? And so being surrounded by people who know more than you is something to always want to strive for. And this, we're not, for anyone who's listening, and I'm going to put this out there right now, what Marc is saying, what I am saying, I am not telling you ignore your friends who you're not learning from. We're not saying that. But in the course of your life, as you're progressing, as you're improving, actively seek out those who know more than you in different areas of your life, whether it's finances, whether it's relationships, whether it's mindset, the stories we tell ourselves, whether it's personal grooming, little simple things like that. Find people who you look up to as an expert and find a way to hear from them, to learn from them, attend a workshop, look at their videos, get their books, or find people who are in that circle who's just like them that you could probably access. And it's amazing. It's amazing what happens. And I don't think you will notice immediately, but then something happens and you look back and you're like, holy crap. Like my life just changed in a way like, holy moly. Like you'll look back and not, because the change happens so small and so incremental that you don't see the big picture immediately until you actually give yourself a chance to stop and look back. So for your son to have that incredible opportunity to engage with an Olympian in fencing, right? Because that's not going to happen every single day. Was the opportunity of a lifetime to learn and grow. Even if he learned one trick, he would be much better at his next competition, right?
Moreover, the Olympian said to him, I like the way that you came at me on the third move. And that changed the entire nature of the day. We will find oftentimes that in seeking out advice, you learn that you weren't as off base as you might have thought.
Yes.
And that too can be uplifting. And be brave in who you ask. I've been riding motorcycles since 2017. I can tell you there have been times where I've gone up to relatively large guys in big leather jackets with interesting hairstyles just for the purpose of asking, what is that on the back of the pipe? What does that do? And it's amazing how people are willing to talk given their expertise. And my God, some of these guys have incredible expertise in their bikes. I'm much more likely to learn when I'm talking face to face with someone. And I found that, especially in terms of motorcycling, everybody's willing to help. And when you go into it realizing that you're probably the worst out there on the road and that everybody has something to teach you, so long as you're okay with that, with the end goal being you're going to get better, ask away. And to this day, I'm surprised by some of the groups of guys that I've been willing to go up to and ask questions about motorcycling.
If there's anything that I want to impart to everyone who's listening here, what Marc just said, ask. If there's something, Marc, in this conversation that I've had with Marc today that you found incredibly insightful, you can send an email, reach out to me at janellesam2020@gmail.com. Send an email. This is going to be on Spotify. This is going to be on All Real. Every Sunday night, there's going to be a new show on allrealradio.com. But we encourage you, ask, be curious, because I couldn't agree more with what Marc just said, in that the information is out there. The ability for you to grow is literally at your fingertips, but you have to be willing to ask. It's not a sign of weakness. And if you don't ask, you won't know, because that saying that I said earlier, the honeybee is not going to stop. I'm not saying that you're a fly. The honeybee is not going to stop to explain to a fly why honey is better than shit. What will happen is that the honeybee is more, if they ask, like, where is it, or show it, they're not going to fight with you and explain to you. But if you want to know, people are willing to share. I am always willing to share. Marc is so reachable. He's willing to share. You're going to hear some incredible conversations from some of my future guests. There are two of my friends, associates, who went to school for medicine and decided, you know what? I don't think being a doctor in a hospital or a practice is what I want to do. And they've changed course, taking some risks that seem to the average person, like, what do you mean? Like, how do you? Because the purpose of GoalPost is to get you to challenge the way you're thinking, to realize that you're not a tree. If you follow me on TikTok, you've probably seen that video that I've made. You are not a tree. You can pick up and leave Rhode Island and move to Florida if you're tired of the cold. A tree cannot. You can pick up and decide that I don't want this career. I want to do something else, because a mango tree cannot decide it wants to do lemons because it's just tired of mangoes, right? You are not a tree. The human capacity is so powerful that if you take anything from what's been discussed here tonight, is that ask a question, surround yourself by amazing people. Failure is not something to be looked at as negative. It is that stepping stone to either put you on the right path or keep you on the right path, or to trigger you into doing something you didn't think possible, because it is one of those things that could make you be very creative and innovative. And so, have a different perspective. There's so much that we can accomplish in this life that, we want to keep that dialogue going. Marc, it's been a pleasure having you on this show.
Thank you so much for having me, Janelle, and best of luck on what I'm sure will be a fantastic run with GoalPost and everything that follows.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So we just ended an amazing conversation with Marc Busch. And if you found the show valuable, you can listen to it again. It's going to be posted on Spotify, and it's also going to be on YouTube. But you can always check out allrealradio.com for the schedule. You'll see the show, so you can see where it's posted and get more information. And if you have questions or comments, reach out. You can find me on Instagram at Miss Janelle Sam, MS_Janelle_Sam, on both Instagram and TikTok. You could connect with me on LinkedIn, Janelle Sam. You can send me a message there as well. So share the show. We hope that this is, adding value and giving you a different perspective on how to think about what you're going for in life and what life means to you. And I look forward to seeing you or having you listen to us and join us on the next episode of GoalPost. Thank you.